Trump's generation. So you probably heard of the famous book Generations. It talks about like the turnings. We're in the fourth turning now. Every 80, 90 years, there's a new cycle of 20 years each. It's kind of like the seasons, summer, spring, winter, fall. History goes through that repeatedly, and I guess it's been going on. I don't know exactly how long, but probably thousands of years. Like, I know the authors talk about, many such cycles, and, for example, the fourth turning was, the Revolutionary War. It's basically the fourth turn. You have the first turning, second turning, third turning, fourth turning, and they play off each other. So basically, like how you were raised influences like how you parent, what you learn, and the reactions to it. So just to give like a quick summary and then tie this into Trump. So Revolutionary War, 80, 90 years later, Civil War, 80 or 90 years later, World War II, 80 or 90 years later today. And what happens is, in the fourth turnings, it's kind of like, I guess, winter, that it's kind of like the old order, just like in winter, everything dies, but it's going to come alive again in the spring. The system that existed isn't working and is breaking down, and then a new order has to be created. So the Revolutionary War, we broke off from England, became our own country. World War II, we had to decide if we wanted to stay together as a country and also obviously deal with slavery. I'm simplifying, obviously, but World War II, what's going to be the future of humanity? Is it going to be authoritarian? And then today, and then you have like precursors leading up to the fourth turning. So you had, the terrorist attacks, 2001, you had the financial crisis, 2008, you had the pandemic. So a lot of these like shocks get built into the system and create a crisis. I would say a crisis of confidence. Like now people's opinions of Congress and government in general and the institutions is kind of like at a low. And there used to be a lot more civility. Now there's kind of like a lot of animosity. Animosity might be too strong a word, but at least differences. If you're on Twitter, which is now called X, you might call it animosity. But so let's tie Trump into this. So, Trump, whether you like him or dislike him or somewhere in between, Trump, I think, is kind of like a polarizing figure, and I don't mean that in a negative way. But either you're really for him or you're kind of like don't really like him. I think I'm sure there's some people in between, but not as many. And he is perhaps kind of like the last of a generation that has been in power for a long time. I mean, there's been a lot of older politicians. I mean, Bill Clinton was a little bit younger when he was elected, but is in that same age group of people that are around 80 years old now. And there's a lot of differences between Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, obviously, not just politically, but in temperament and a lot of other things. But I think that there's kind of like a shadowing, some might say a foreshadowing, of like kind of like a new generation, new thought systems that are developing. Like if we have lost trust in our current institutions. So for example, after World War II, there was a lot of optimism because, the Allies had defeated the Axis, and the United States came into prominence. I mean, I think they came into prominence after World War I, but continuing accelerated after World War II. So it created a period of prosperity and optimism because there was like just one superpower. And then, the 50s were very prosperous. The 60s, which, after about 20 years after World War II, more of a second cycle of like, turmoil, questioning authority. So in the first cycle, you tend to be very optimistic, more of a top-down control, like don't question authority, like the 50s, like, just the classic TV shows characterizing it later, like is it, what was the advertising one, Mad something, about the advertisers in the 50s, Leave It to Beaver, very conventional, like don't rock the boat, don't question authority. And then the 60s, kind of like the complete opposite of that, kind of like question everything, don't respect anyone over, don't trust anyone over 30. And then the 70s, 80s, a lot of stagflation, economic problems, oil shock, and then the 80s, more prosperity, greed is good, and, fall of the Berlin Wall. So over time, and let's tie Trump into this now, how you are raised kind of like affects your worldview. So, Trump is about 80 years old. So the reason why these cycles or super cycles or whatever you want to call them recreate every 80, 90 years is because that is what the human lifespan is. So the people that, are 80 or 90 years old today, they've witnessed like all four of these cycles. And then as they pass, with longevity, maybe people will be living longer than 80, 90 years old. But, there's still obviously a few people that live longer, but generally most people. So what happens is like after, another 5 or 10 years, 15 years, whatever it is, there won't be anybody alive that was alive during World War II, or just a very few people. So it's kind of like the lessons of whatever we learned in World War II or in that fourth turning previously will be lost. They'll be recorded in history, but it'll be, kind of erased from people that actually went through it. So that's why they say, in my mind, that's not the only reason why, the lessons of history are repeated, because, humans go through different generations, different lifespans, and they say that history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. So Trump, some people feel, is more authoritarian, and that's a word that's kind of like a little bit charged. Some people would probably say that just more traditional, more law and order, more, anti-chaos, anti-woke. There's a lot of different ways you can frame it. I think, even though we go through these cycles, maybe like I say, it goes from like more top down to more bottom up. Like the 60s was very bottom up. It's kind of like question everything, don't give in to authority. And I think Trump is of the generation of very, authority. It's interesting because Bill Clinton is of the same generation, and so I don't want to overcharacterize. So let's just talk about Trump, but also related to generation, that there's kind of a growing consensus or zeitgeist, if you want to think of it, or kind of like just ideas in the atmosphere that things have kind of stalled. Like Peter Thiel would say that, like, in terms of information technology, that we've had huge progress with computers and things of that nature. Now with AI, the internet, cloud computing, nanotechnology, blockchain, all these things, exponential technologies. But aside from that, like he would say that housing is pretty much the same, education, healthcare, not like really, great advances. We had the war on cancer back in the 70s, and we, have not seen as many significant, sizable advances. And, education looks fairly much the same. You do have online education now, but it's still like structured, classrooms, and maybe not quite as much, but housing, transportation, like these things have not radically changed, although we do have electric cars, autonomous vehicles, on the horizon, and the eVTOLs, the flying cars. So I think, these things are starting to transform as well. But there's a sense that like we've kind of lost our way a little bit, and I think the fourth turning is always, kind of symbolic of that, in terms of people left behind. That the American dream was always that, and it's not the same for everybody, obviously, but that each generation would be more prosperous or have more opportunities than the one before. More people could own their homes and things of that nature. But In this younger generation, there's been a lot of opportunities that are not present. Like Trump's generation, I'm not just saying Trump, but has kind of held on to power like a lot longer. Like our leaders are much older in the last, 10, 20 years, whatever it's been, than perhaps historically. And there's going to be like perhaps a changing of the guard, like even the great wealth transfer, like they say a lot of wealth. And, with wealth transfer and with political transfer, you also have cultural transfer. Like you look at some of the younger politicians, like it's not uniform, but take Mandami, if that's how you say his name correctly, running for New York City mayor. I think there's kind of like, this is just my sense of it, but kind of like a rejection might be too strong a word, but kind of maybe reformulation of what the primary values should be. Like I think Trump is kind of like more law and order, build the wall, very focused on economics, obviously, but kind of like a top-down, like we're going to dictate, through tariffs and things like that. Whereas Madami obviously is, more about affordability. I mean, Trump also talks about affordability, but not nearly as much. Younger generation, you have AOC, like she's pretty strident, but she's talking also a lot about the working class. Now, obviously, Bernie Sanders, he's older and he talks about the working class, and Elizabeth Sanders. So it's not so much a question of like class warfare, it's more a sense of like, and this is what's hard to put into words. That's why I think we're coming out of this fourth turning. We're looking like what is the vocabulary to see the world going forward. I think like narrative is really like how we identify. So is it a matter of us versus them? Is that going to be like, building bridges versus like building divisions? Is it going to be like trust between people, trust in government, trust in narrative? Like now with AI, it's kind of like competing for narrative. Like it used to be you had the three networks, and now you have, everyone's a podcaster, everyone's a commentator on X, and, many more voices. And you also have technology that can help and technology that can hurt. Like, you can have nuclear energy, but you can also have nuclear bombs. And AI, you can have like, AI assistants that help you, but you could also have AI bots that, do destructive things, or deep fakes or things of that nature. So I think in terms of Trump's generation, the world is changing. We just don't know exactly how it's changing. And I think it's changing at a more accelerated basis, because I think like in any fourth turning, what got us here is not what's going to get us there. And things have kind of like broken down to a point where we can't just keep going. There's so much income inequality. I'm not saying that's, hasn't been the case like throughout history a lot, but it's been increasing for a long time. And I think people feel marginalized, especially those that are more on the outside. And I think that that can lead to anger, disappointment. Trump like wants to go into the cities and do law and order, and I think that's always been like the traditional way of kind of doing things, more top down. But I think that now you're seeing more protests and more, I wouldn't even call them like overt protests, but I would just say more independence. Like people are, some people say that people don't think anymore now that they stopped reading books, and, TV has infiltrated everything and now streaming. But, it's interesting. I think people are thinking more and thinking less. Like if you look back 100 years ago, like they had these great books of literature and like these great discussions and everything. But now I think you have like, podcasters, and you have commentators, and you have experts in every area. Like just look at YouTube. It's like its own, global university. So I think people are still questioning things and thinking more, but I think there's also at the same time kind of like, because we have information overload, we just have to accept things certain more because we don't know about everything. And, people don't have the time because like, a lot of people have to work, 2 or 3 jobs or whatever, just by the way society, is structured. And I think that there's going to be like radical, they say that there's, excuse me, I forget if it's like months where decades happen, or weeks where decade happens, but I believe in the next few years it's going to be like perhaps more change, more sorting out, even from a spiritual basis, like, we've had kind of like the loss of the effect of community, the loss of effect of religion. Even the left and right in government, they only stay 4 days a week now. The government is actually shut down right now. So we're going to have to decide, like, do we want to go more back to community values, but with technology? Do people want to simplify their lives? Do they want to be busier than ever? Do they want to make as much money as possible? Is AI going to do everything? Basically what I'm saying is that there's more to sort out, and I think Trump's generation is kind of like a period of like relative, I wouldn't call it stability because the world has always been chaotic, but kind of like more set ways of thinking and doing things, and I think now things are much more up for grabs.